Television and written word are such different forms of expression and media that translating a singular idea between the two often necessitates a billion little changes, some of which end up being for the better, others for the worse, especially when you're dealing with a series as large as A Song of Ice and Fire. One massive point of pain in the translation is the fact that the book comes locked with perspective. In each chapter, we are in the mind of each individual characters in a way that really can't be translated to the show. We're seeing their innermost thoughts and feelings and getting the world through their eyes specifically. Oftentimes, they act as unreliable narrators and end up shaping the way the narrative is viewed by the individual who is reading it. In the show, the camera acts as kind of a omnipotent, just kind of neutral, objective observer, as it kind of has to, as narration really isn't an option for a show on the scale of Game of Thrones. With that said, this shift in perspective loses a lot. In addition to that internal monologue that I previously referenced, dreams are something that come up a lot in the original text that really don't get any focus in the mainline Game of Thrones show. There has been a bit more focus on it with recent adaptations, which I'll get to in discussion, but today I figured I'd discuss the importance of dreams in A Song of Ice and Fire and what I think Game of Thrones lost by failing to adapt them. There are a lot of dreams in A Song of Ice and Fire. We have over 20 viewpoint characters, not including prologues and epilogues, and each of them, as mentioned, has a very unique perspective, and they all have to sleep. And when they do, they have these varying visions of their past, sometimes their future, and the events that are happening to them in some sort of way that reflects their internal state and where they're coming from as well. Dreams as a narrative device are one of my favorite things to see in a story of any kind. I think when they're done well, they can massively elevate the audience's understanding of an individual character, but they have to be done well. Doing them in a way that is good is often easier to do in writing than it is in a show, as you can get really out there with descriptions, and the only limit is the viewer's imagination. Whereas on television, you have to actually see these things expressed before you. That's not to say that adapting dreams on the big screen or small screen, I guess in this instance, is impossible. I think numerous different shows and movies have done it to a fantastic degree. The Sopranos is my second favorite show of all time, and I think they do an excellent job with dream sequences. One of my favorite episodes is at the end of season 2. It's called Funhouse, where there's a massive extended dream sequence from the main character's perspective that is bizarre. You can really tell that it's a dream, as there are these uncanny elements of it and things to not be true just happening within the main character's mind, and allowing him to naturally come to a realization that us, the viewer, have known for a very long time. I won't quite spoil that. You should watch it if you haven't. With that said, Game of Thrones really didn't want to go into dreams. The showrunners, David and Dan, really wanted this to be a grounded story. They very much kind of resented the fact that it was a fantasy in many aspects, and that resulted in the idea of magic being kind of stripped away from it. Really, the only magic around was dragons and the White Walkers, and they really didn't want to talk much about those either, because they just wanted to have fights and have people talk to each other but say dumb things. You're probably saying, but Quinn, House of the Dragon, has so many dreams in season 2, but those were kind of bad, but also kind of good depending on perspective. I think House of the Dragon is a really interesting case, and I think they do a lot right and a lot wrong. Let me explain. So when we're talking about dreams in House of the Dragon, the main ones that we've been exposed to have been Daemon's in Harrenhal. This was essentially his entire arc in season 2, as he gets there in episode 3 and doesn't leave until after the very end of the finale. Throughout this time in this haunted castle, we see him undergo a massive change of character, largely spurred by these visions that continually haunt him. I think that there are two main flaws with Daemon's dreams as they are presented to the audience. One, I think there are maybe a few too many of them. Daemon is just kind of in dream world for the entire season, and at a point, these dreams seem to get kind of repetitive and tell us the same things over and over. I think that his arc could have probably been condensed down by an episode or two, and I would imagine that in the original version of House of the Dragon season 2, where the episodes were, the right length and they had the right number of episodes, maybe this would have come off better, but as it stands, it did feel a tad long-winded. This would be the equivalent of a book character just dreaming for like 6 chapters in a row, and it was quite long-winded at a point. I should briefly say as well, the other issue I had with Damon's dreams was their ending. I didn't particularly care for his last magical Weirwood vision for a number of reasons, but that's a can of worms for another day. I overall, broad strokes, think it just takes away from his larger overall arc, as all of this personal growth and reflection on his own memories is just completely undercut by, oh, it's a magical prophecy. I have to do this because it's my destiny. It's lame, and I don't like it as a storytelling device. I think dreams are an excellent tool to show, not tell, a character's mental state at a given time. And I think that Game of Thrones kind of disregards that in its entirety. Specifically, there are two key dreams that they decided to include kind of post hoc after the fact, as they passed them by when they were originally supposed to appear, and then just threw them in. Well, in one case, it's a flashback that was seemingly kind of just randomly tossed in there, and the other is a vision from Bran. Those being Cersei's time with Maggie the Frog from when she was young, though that was weird and didn't really end up contributing much because she ended up having that extra kid with Euron, supposedly, allegedly. But overall, that kind of loses out on Cersei finally unearthing this memory after she has kind of buried it deep within herself. But this continual lapse of paranoia throughout A Feast for Crows just brings it up and brings it up, and it eventually bubbles to the surface when she is at a moment of weakness. Same thing happens with Ned Stark. We see Ned Stark's kind of vision of the Tower of Joy in season 6 through Bran's perspective, but we get a version of that in the first book in the series when we're still in Ned's viewpoint, as he is having these fever dreams after being injured in this fight with Jaime Lannister when his horse falls on his leg, and overall he just has this kind of vision thinking back to this vow he made his sister and how it has defined his life since then. We lose the personal aspect and getting into the motivation of both of these characters by just throwing them in haphazardly and not having these as actual dream sequences. Martin also has really interesting language surrounding dreams. Both Ned and Cersei, and also prologue viewpoint Varamir, kind of use the same term when entering this fever dream that defines their life from a past memory. In all three instances, this sequence begins by saying, he dreamt an old dream, and then a very simplistic descriptor of each of the sequences. It's such a haunting and evocative, very short sentence that I really love, and I'm excited to see what other characters will dream old dreams in the future of the story. I could see John Connington maybe doing it. That could also just be my perspective, but I think with him dying of grayscale, I think that's also pretty good motivator to have him reflect on the past a little bit. Maybe him and Rhaegar did get together. I also wanted to ask, what's your favorite dream in the main series? And do you think they could have adapted it well in Game of Thrones? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And while you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and it's very nice of you. I also think that tearing these dreams away just chops off entire portions of a character arc, and it really bugs me. Daenerys 10, A Dance with Dragons, her most recent chapter in the entire series, gets dunked on a lot for some of the physical I'd say gastrointestinal issues that go on there. But there is such a fantastic dream sequence therein where we get to see Daenerys finally reject this idea that she should be working towards peace and Meereen, this kind of ethos that has driven her throughout the entirety of this book so far. She finally just gets rid of it, dismisses it, and embraces fire and blood through the image of her brother and the image of her dragons. It's such a fantastic and well-written sequence, and I thoroughly love it. I think it's one of the best written Daenerys chapters in the entire series, and that's just pretty much entirely cut in the show. Not only is she not really sick or in a bad state after leaving the pit with Drogon, she's just kind of wandering around for 5 minutes, and then she just gets found by Dothraki. That entire image of her kind of getting back to her roots and having all of this royalty stripped away and getting back to the true fire and blood of the Targaryens is just gone in its entirety. There's also the prophetic element at play. Game of Thrones really didn't go much for prophecy, even when there were things that involved mystical visions of the future. They tended to really strip away most of the meat from those bones. If you look at the House of the Undying, you really see that. That's not quite a dream, as there are psychotropic drugs involved, at least in the book. In the show, she just kind of walks into a house. It's kind of nothing. But in both instances, it is an issue of this kind of very magical experience where they are kind of dreaming in this stupor of the future. We see this through Daenerys' eyes, we see this through Aeron's eyes, we almost see it through Victarion's eyes, but he spits out Shade of the Evening and robs us of the greatest chapter in the history of A Song of Ice and Fire. But in all three of these instances, we are seeing kind of a drug-induced vision of what's to come in the story. In addition to that, dragon dreams. They're talked about a fair bit in House of the Dragon as being an important element. If I had to guess, we'll see them in Dunk and Egg at least a little bit, maybe from Egg's perspective, or maybe as siblings. Who knows? I don't know exactly how much the show will do with that. But with that said, I have some hope, as there are at least prophetic dreams involved in the third Dunk and Egg story, and Martin does like the adaptation so far. So hopefully those show up. There are also some really cool signifiers that tell us when characters are dreaming and when there might be magical kind of issues at play. Jamie is a great example of this. I've talked about his dreams in a video from a long time ago where the editing isn't great, so I apologize if you decide to go back and watch that. But Jamie typically dreams, and he has two hands in his dreams. This is how he knows that it's not real, as he is whole once again. But he has this one dream. It's kind of prophetic. It's weird. It seems as though someone's speaking to him. Maybe it's Quaithe. Maybe it's some other force. It's unclear, but he does have one hand that signals to the reader organically without any real kind of pointing out, other than the ghost in this dream kind of saying, how many hands do you have? Is this a dream or is this something greater? It's just a great way to signify this to the audience. I think it would have been really cool to see in Game of Thrones, just have a sequence, oh, Jamie has two hands. That's weird. I wonder what's going on. And then have that be revealed as a dream. As I think that Jamie's arc in the show is at its best when he's kind of introspecting. We see that in the bath scene, but the lack of dreams really robs us of any further introspection, as there isn't a dream before he goes back to save Brienne. He just kind of dips at a point. I talked briefly about dragon dreams, but I should also talk a little bit about wolf dreams. All of the Stark children, except for Sansa, whose direwolf dies very early on, have these dreams where they are seeing through the eyes of their wolves. They are warging these creatures because they all have these supernatural skin-changing powers. In the show, it's just Bran who has that, and it really diminishes the relationship between the wolves and their owners, and it seems to take away from what makes these Stark kids special, as Jon kind of fights this gift pretty actively, and his relationship with ghosts is often a reflection of his relationship with his gifts inherited from House Stark. Arya ends up actually taking advantage of it. When she's blinded in Braavos, she doesn't just receive training and become a magical ninja who doesn't need to see. No, she's warging cats around her. Her name is Cat of the Canals, and she ends up warging cats and using their eyes to see around her. And that's part of what gets her back into the good graces of the Faceless Men, as she's able to take advantage of this ability and really use it to better herself. It makes these characters all interesting, and it does create lasting ties, as Arya continues to dream of herself as the Night Wolf, which I guess there was a movie by a similar title out recently, but she's having these visions and dreaming through Nymeria's eyes, even though she's on a different continent. I'll also note that one of my favorite introductions to a viewpoint character, being Cersei's first chapter in A Feast for Crows, starts out with her dreaming, and it just tells us so much from the first line. She dreamt she sat at the Iron Throne, high above them all. And the way that dream progresses, with her in a position of power, and this paranoia about Tyrion filling her and eventually causing her to cut herself on the throne and to just be kind of stung by the barbs of this power she's so coveted. It's just so well written, and I love it. Overall, I can see why some of the dreams were cut. There are a lot of them in Ice and Fire. I'll link in the description to a Reddit post that lists all of them, and in the comments actually writes out all of them. It's really good. I'd highly recommend it. But I think that cutting some of them, definitely understandable. You only have 10 hours a season, and you really don't want to end up spending too much of that on things that aren't direct plot progression. But I think that including some of them would really deepen the characterization of these individuals we love so much. And I think it really could have just been to the show's benefit. I think that there is definitely a line there, though, and I think that House of the Dragon maybe kind of stepped a little bit over that line. I really enjoyed Daemon's arc there, but I think it was maybe a little too overblown and drawn out. I also think that dreams being integral to the text kind of is spelled out in the fact that the final book in the series is intended to be called A Dream of Spring. Whether or not that book will ever be published is unclear, but that title very much evokes this idea of not only are dreams crucial to the series as it's just being named after them, but the idea of dreams and aspirations being these crucial things that drive our characters forward are going to be what gets them through this oppressive winter. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it really helps the channel out. I'll have many more videos out for you in the near future on House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, and Dunk and Egg. And also, I have a Patreon, which I keep forgetting to mention. That's new. You'll be able to join a Discord server and get access to videos early, so I highly recommend you check that out. You can be one of my silver princes, and I'd really appreciate it. Thank you again so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future. I think Brienne is probably the topic of my next video, so look forward to that. Goodbye, everyone.